Hi, and you're very welcome to my podcast show. In this episode, I got the chance to speak with Murray Shanahan. Murray is the Professor of Cognitive Robotics at Imperial College London and a Senior Research Scientist at DeepMind. With a Ph.D. from Cambridge University, he's carried out work in artificial intelligence, robotics, and cognitive science. Murray was a scientific advisor for the 2014 film Ex Machina. In 2017, he joined DeepMind, retaining his professorship at Imperial College on a part-time basis. In the podcast, we spoke about John McCarthy, the son of an Irish immigrant, also called John McCarthy, from Valentia Island in Kerry on the west coast of Ireland, and maybe the most important Irish-American computer scientist, pioneer and inventor, known today as the father of artificial intelligence. In the mid-1950s, John McCarthy coined the term artificial intelligence, which he would define as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. We also spoke in the podcast about George Boole, a largely self-taught English mathematician, philosopher and logician, most of whose short career was spent in the first professor of mathematics at Queen's College Cork in Ireland, now known today as University College Cork. He worked in the fields of differential equations and algebraic logic and is best known as the author of the book The Laws of Thought, which was first published in 1854, which contains Boolean algebra. Boolean logic is credited with laying the foundations for today's information age.
So my name is Murray Shanahan and I am Professor of Cognitive Robotics at Imperial College London, or at least I am for one day a week. It used to be my permanent position, my full-time position, and the rest of the time I work at DeepMind, which is this London-based AI research lab owned by Alphabet, who also own Google, of course. So that's where I spend most of my time. DeepMind, were a startup back in, I think they started way back in 2010, and the idea of the founders, Dennis Hassabis and Shane Legg and Mustafa Suleiman, was to try to create artificial general intelligence. And artificial general intelligence, that really is what we think of as AI when we think about AI in science fiction films, really. The kind of thing that we don't really know how to build yet, but AI that has the same kinds of abilities as human beings. So today, we only see these things in science fiction films, but there's every reason to think that we might be able to build into computers the kind of level of intelligence human beings have. And that little word general in the middle of artificial general intelligence is there because AI today is actually is a very important, thriving field, and we could do amazing things with AI and machine learning in particular that have huge commercial application. But all of those things are narrow applications of artificial intelligence. So usually your artificial intelligence system can only carry out one task, like, for example, labeling images in your photo album, or maybe answering a few questions from Wikipedia or something through Alexa or Siri or something like that, or self-driving cars or playing chess. So those are all different systems. It's not like one system that's doing all of those different things. It's a different system doing each of those tasks. But whereas we human beings are able to learn to do any of those things. And that's why the keyword general is there. We want to try and build artificial general intelligence, so something that can do a whole range of tasks, a whole range of intellectual tasks that a human being can do.
It's not tomorrow. It might take a little bit of time to get there.
Well, it's not tomorrow, but the mission of DeepMind was to try to fulfill that kind of dream and eventually build this artificial general intelligence. And DeepMind had a great success back in 2014, where they produced this little system that used a technique called deep reinforcement learning. So that's deep learning with neural networks, and reinforcement learning, which is kind of trial and error learning. And they used this deep reinforcement learning system to learn how to play these Atari video games, these retro video games like Space Invaders and Breakout and so on. And the great thing about this little system was that all it saw was just the pixels on the screen. It didn't know there were objects there. It didn't know anything at all except that just the raw pixels on the screen and the score. And just based on trying to, play the game by trying random actions and figuring out what gave it a positive score, it gradually learned to get very, very, very good at these games. And you could give it any one of these sort of suite of Atari video games, and it would learn to get really, really good at those games. So that was enough to really to impress Google, who then bought DeepMind and then funded us, very generously. So now we're in a position to pursue just pure research. The majority of people here are doing pure science, pure research. And 2016, I think it was, the production of this Alphago system, which learned to play the Chinese game of Go. Very, very difficult game, more difficult than chess in many respects. And mathematically speaking, it's more complex than chess. And although chess was something that we could solve with computers, be better than humans, way back in 1997, the first computer was able to beat a world champion at chess. Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov in 1997, but nobody thought that Go was the sort of thing where humans were going to be beaten by computers for a long time yet, because it's just mathematically just far too huge a space of possibilities to explore using just brute force search, which is the way Deep Blue worked. So it came as quite a surprise when DeepMind produced this AlphaGo system, which was then able to beat the world's very, very best player. So Lee Sedol, very famous, absolutely top of the world player, was beaten by the AlphaGo system, and then KGA was beaten by it. And now I think all great Go players recognise that the latest incarnations of AlphaGo are really way better than even the best human that's ever lived. Well, I'm still not sure that we're getting there, because those are still kind of, it's very impressive that you can actually get to superhuman performance on something like Go, but it's still so AlphaGo can't, go into my kitchen and make a cup of tea or learn how to make a cup of tea or figure out how to make a cup of tea in, say, a strange kitchen that it's never seen before. So that's something. So humans have this ability to generalize from past experience to new kinds of settings, drawing on their common sense understanding of the world that we still don't know how to get computers to do. So that's very much the kind of thing that I'm interested in working on.
To transfer that general intelligence.
How to transfer or how to build into computers.
We don't be too overly concerned, not yet. Anyways, not this year.
You can be concerned or you can be excited on what you think the implications are going to be of developing AGI, but you don't have to be either just yet, because it's not quite around the corner. But if it were around the corner, then if and when it is, we do need to think quite hard about how we use such a very powerful technology. My family history. So my father's family come from County Kerry, and my father's family all came from Valentia Island, in fact, off the coast of County Kerry. So my father's family and my father's mother's family, all from that one little island, Valentia. And about 15 miles up the coast from Valentia Island is a little fishing village called Cremain. The founding father of artificial intelligence was a man called John McCarthy. And John McCarthy, he coined the term artificial intelligence. And his father was born and raised in Cremain in County Kerry. So John's family really were very much a Kerry family. So he absolutely, that's where his pedigree was, from County Kerry. And so John really is the person who, more than anyone else you can credit with founding the whole field. And it dates back to 1956. So in 1956. There was a sort of inaugural conference that John organised, Dartmouth. So this is known as the Dartmouth Conference. And in this conference, sort of many of the figures who then became the leaders of the whole field for many decades to come, they sort of got together for the first time and discussed the possibility of making computers that could carry out these kinds of intellectual tasks, like understanding language and proving mathematical theorems and things like that. And so John actually coined the phrase artificial intelligence in the little proposal document that he wrote for that Dartmouth conference. And then, of course, he also made many fundamental contributions to the whole field from early on. And I knew him quite well, so I was very lucky to meet him, and I got to know him quite well. Because we worked in a kind of Well, I was working at that time in the sort of corner of artificial intelligence, very much based on logic, which the corner of AI that he pioneered more than anything else and made a lot of contributions to. And so I started, bumping into him in conferences and found myself presenting to audiences where this very famous, elderly statesman of the field was in the audience, and pretty soon I got to know him quite well. And then he even invited me to, so he was at Stanford at that point in the States, in California, invited me to go and work with him a couple of times in Stanford. So I had a couple of visits with him for just short visits for a few weeks in Stanford. And generally I knew him pretty well. He died in 2011, I think, sadly, but very, very important figure in the field.
Wow, that was not so long ago. How fantastic is that? That's pretty cool. Yeah, wow.
1927 he was born, and 2011 he died. So I would like to credit, the whole field I'd like to County Kerry. I'd like to make it a kind of County Kerry field, artificial intelligence. But unfortunately, I think we have to give a bit of credit to Cork, because there's another really interesting connection with the rest of Ireland, which is through George Boole. Now, George Boole was a professor at the University of Cork, University College Cork, in the 19th century. So this was long before computers. And Boole was a pioneer of mathematical logic. When you think about and, or, and not, so the kinds of things that are absolutely at the foundation of computer hardware and are built into all kind of computer languages and at the sort of absolute foundation of logic. That was all started by George Boole, and much of the pioneering work was done in Cork, in the city of Cork, at University College Cork. And every undergraduate computer science student, to learn Boolean algebra, and in their first year, and it's absolutely the foundation of computer hardware and reasoning about how computer programs work and so on. So Boole was sort of foundational. But another interesting fact is that one of Boole's great-great-grandson is Geoffrey Hinton. And Geoffrey Hinton is the person who, perhaps arguably more than anyone else, is responsible for the current boom in artificial intelligence. So Jeff is very much a living person who was professor at Toronto University, and he really sort of inaugurated the whole field of deep learning, as we think of it. And deep learning, based on neural networks, is at the heart of everything that's making AI such a successful field of that. And he is George Boole's great-great-grandson. So it might be a little bit tenuous, but there's definitely this Western Irish connection there. So as much as I'd like to award the whole field to County Kerry, I have to give County Cork a little bit of credit.
Very good. And there is a difference, that's for sure. The people of Cork will let you know. Yeah, no, John, it's John McCarthy's background and George Boole's. I mean, you hear the names, but you don't make the connection. So it's a really nice story to be able to tell. The way with everything is gone, and the way most of the funding goes to Harvard, MIT, it's okay. A lot of the money goes that direction. Stanford, you don't really tend to hear sort of the foundations of where these professors come out of. And also there is, I suppose, a tradition of things being in the family. It gets into the genetics somehow, I think.
Yes, yeah. I mean, so clearly Jeff comes from a very academic family, so I looked it up on Wikipedia earlier on because I knew you were going to ask me about it. And in fact, it seems that his whole family, and Boole's, many of Boole's descendants were academics of one sort or another. So,
I really think a lot of things do take generations to. I mean, an artificial intelligence has been a slow burn or slow boil. So we just didn't have the data, did we?
Yeah, data has been the critical thing to really enable this technique of deep learning to really work. It kind of worked in the lab back in the 1980s and 90s, but it wasn't really, it sort of reached limits where it wasn't really very successful on complex images with with high resolution. It's only really with availability of very large quantities of labeled data that it's been possible to really make the best use of these machine learning techniques.
Okay, very interesting, Murray. Thanks very much for that. I mean, with your surname as well. I mean, there's no escaping the Irish connection for sure.
My daughter is called Kerry and my son is called Liam. So,
oh my God, yeah, it's really strong. Yeah, there's so many things that you only find out about, and you don't tend to know about until you go away and people tell you about things. You know, there's so much of history I don't know much about. You know, in Ireland, and everything just kind of falls, and you figure out things as you go. This is a really nice story.
John told me that he'd been over to County Kerry when I remember him telling me at one point. So I was telling him that my family came from Valentia, and he said, he'd been out there, and he thought he had some cousins on Valentia. And I thought this was a kind of, how sometimes Americans think it's a tiny country and everyone knows everybody in there. And I had no idea actually until after he died that he meant it really. He really meant it. So his family came from really just a few miles from where my family came from, and I didn't actually know that at the time.
Yeah, in Ireland, 1 degree of separation, 1.5 degrees. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's not 6 degrees here. Thanks for listening and checking out my podcast. You can head over to Spotify and find my podcast there, or on Apple iTunes. Subscribe to my podcast on my website. You can head over to www.inaom.io for further details.